you, would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that? Actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Klein House, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said?
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio just said yes. Yes, he would revoke the visa of someone in the United States who publicly claimed that Jewish people are untrustworthy and dangerous. That is his stated policy. The problem is that the Trump administration had already granted refugee status to a man who tweeted exactly those words. And Rubio's explanation for why the same standard does not apply to that man was 4 words: a totally different process. That answer is not a legal distinction. It is a retreat. And the question that produced it took Representative Pramila Jayapal 8 minutes to build.
On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Romesa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed.
Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington State sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. She is a former immigration rights attorney who spent years litigating the exact categories of law that govern student visas, refugee status, and the discretionary authority of the Secretary of State. When she sat down across from Marco Rubio in this hearing, she was not asking questions she did not know the answers to. She was building a record. The trap she was constructing had 2 parts. The first was a specific case: Romesa Öztürk, a graduate student at Tufts University, detained and transported to a Louisiana prison for writing an opinion piece in her college newspaper. The second was a name Rubio had not been asked about yet: Charles Klein House, a white South African refugee applicant. And the question that connects both names is the only question this hearing is really about. When the United States government applies one rule to a Muslim student from Turkey and a different rule to a white Christian refugee from South Africa, what is the rule?
Authority to revoke visas. And soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she had engaged in any activities that were a threat to national security. And
2 facts that belong together. 1. Masked, armed, plainclothes agents detained Romesa Öztürk on a public street and transported her across state lines to a detention facility in Louisiana. 2. The State Department's own internal memorandum concluded that the Secretary did not have sufficient grounds to revoke her visa in the first place, and that there was no evidence she had engaged in any activities posing a threat to national security. Rubio's department wrote that memo. Not a watchdog organization, not a political opponent. The State Department, Rubio's own agency. That memo reached a conclusion that directly contradicted the action Rubio had already taken. The revocation had already happened. The detention had already happened. And the State Department's own lawyers had documented, in writing, that neither was justified. The justification for both, as Jayapal was building toward with the next set of documents, was an opinion piece published in a college newspaper. A federal court agreed with that characterization and ordered her released.
And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed
somewhere?
There's
no constitutional right to a student visa.
A federal court ordered her release, not because the government's lawyers failed to argue their case competently, because the sole basis for detaining her was that she had co-authored a newspaper article. That is a federal judge's finding, in a written order, on the record. And Rubio's response to the First Amendment question was technically correct as a statement of law. There is no constitutional right to a student visa. But it did not answer what Jayapal actually asked. She did not ask whether Öztürk had a right to the visa. She asked whether Rubio has the authority to revoke it because of what she wrote. Those are different questions. One is about the visa. The other is about the speech that triggered the revocation. Rubio answered the first and left the second standing.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
while I have the authority, I will
clear.
continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear
You
this
said that,
country
Mr. Secretary.
apart
Let me
because
reclaim my
visas,
time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work.
Well,
I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country
Secretary Rubio,
apart.
I'm talking about this particular case.
We don't do the snatching. That line is worth sitting with for a moment. Rubio is the Secretary of State. He revoked the visa. The visa revocation was the legal predicate that enabled every subsequent action: the detention, the transport to Louisiana, the denial of counsel for nearly 24 hours. Without the revocation, there is no lawful basis for the arrest. Without the arrest, there is no Louisiana detention facility. Without the detention, there is no 24-hour denial of counsel. Every step in the chain that followed Öztürk's detention runs directly back to the single official act that Rubio acknowledges was his: the visa revocation. The Secretary of State who made the revocation is now explaining that he cannot be held responsible for the enforcement that the revocation authorized and enabled. It is the legal equivalent of pulling the trigger and then explaining that you are not responsible for the bullet's trajectory because a different agency manufactured the bullet. The agencies did the snatching. Rubio did the revoking. And his own department's memorandum concluded the revoking was not justified. The sequence is complete. Only the accountability is missing.
If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
law
accurate?
student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa. She wrote an op-ed.
She wrote an op-ed. Jayapal said it twice, not because she forgot she had already said it, because the repetition was deliberate, because she wanted that specific characterization, the full scope of what the government had done, on the record, twice before the committee. The entire apparatus of federal enforcement, the visa revocation, the masked plainclothes agents, the transport across state lines, the detention in Louisiana, the denial of counsel for nearly a full day, all of it deployed against a graduate student who wrote an opinion piece in her college newspaper about her university's response to an overseas conflict. Rubio's argument that agents needed masks to protect themselves from a Tufts University doctoral student who had authored a campus op-ed is the kind of argument that sounds like it is answering a question while actually confirming everything the question implied. If the arrest was fully legitimate, the masks added nothing, and the denial of counsel was not necessary. If the masks were necessary for the agent's safety, then the threat level implied by that necessity is completely incompatible with the stated basis for the arrest, an opinion piece. Jayapal had one more question, and it was the one Rubio had no room to evade.
And
Would
we'll
you
do more.
revoke?
We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest.
Are
who's
you
here to stir up
going to
trouble.
revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking
well,
to get crazy people
actually,
out of our country.
it's not just about revoking.
Forward
You
to
actually,
revoking the visas
Secretary
of any
Rubio,
lunatics you
excuse
can
me,
identify.
reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Klein House, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said?
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and
you
we'll revoke
revoked
them.
a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
To close the loop, Rubio said, yes. If someone in the United States on a guest visa publishes content claiming that Jewish people are untrustworthy and dangerous, Rubio would revoke that visa. That is his stated policy, spoken under oath in a congressional hearing. Charles Klein House is a white South African who applied for refugee status in the United States. His public social media activity included a tweet stating that Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group. The Trump administration granted him refugee status, the same administration that detained Romesa Öztürk in a Louisiana prison for writing an op-ed about university policy, approved Charles Klein House's application to enter the United States as a refugee after he had publicly posted that Jewish people are dangerous. Rubio's answer, that's a totally different process, is a procedural distinction, not a substantive one. The process for student visas and the process for refugee applications are different. What Jayapal was asking about is not the process. She was asking about the standard. If the standard for revoking a visa is that someone has expressed views the Secretary finds objectionable, why does that standard not apply when the objectionable views are anti-Semitic and the person expressing them is a white South African seeking refugee status? Rubio did not answer that question. His time ran out before he could try. But the record now contains both facts, and the gap between them is not a procedural difference. It is a policy. Op-ed writer, detained. Anti-Semitic tweet poster, refugee status granted. Rubio's explanation, a totally different process. What would you have asked him?